I think this is one of the items that I'm very much fascinated about from my side. I just recall a few years back, we did one of the projects somewhere here in Gauteng, and we commissioned the plant. I think it was during summer, and then the slaking temperature was the region of 72 to 76 degrees C, and everyone was happy. And come winter, then I got a call from the client and say, "What's happening here?" I think on that day we're just above the freezing point. It was full day, and what's happening? Like he was saying, it's getting about just above 50 degrees C. It's not up. It's not achieving 76 degrees Celsius anymore. And but I think there was no parameters change in terms of how much lime it's putting in and how much water it's putting in. And before we eventually make our way there, he thought like maybe the solution would be just to put more lime with the hope that the temperature will increase. And Karsten, maybe you can just, from your previous explanation, you were talking about temperature. Can you just touch on that, and maybe you can share some light as what was actually happening when that scenario happened?
Yeah, very, very valid point there. I mean, effectively, when you add a certain amount of lime to a certain volume of water at a constant ratio, your increase in temperature will only be finite. So, for instance, if you do a 20% slurry concentration, the increase in temperature would generally be about 50 degrees Celsius. So obviously, if you start with 25 degrees water temperature going into the slaker, you add 50 to it, you get to around about 75 degrees. On a very cold day, as Prince explained already, you start with 0 degrees and you add 50 degrees to that, and you end up at 50 degrees in the end. So it's not really a problem in terms of the process. When you see those sort of problems, what one really then could, for instance, do is to increase the actual water temperature going into the slaker itself. And in some countries where you have, sub-zero temperatures, for instance, that is a common thing to do, where you either electrically or preheat the water or with the gas. And there's another way of doing it, is that you actually run that water line around the slaker itself with a heat exchanger, because obviously your slaker will run at a higher temperature, and you literally preheat the water before it goes into the slaker itself. And again, one would have to have a look at that very carefully. It may not be a major risk. Sort of everything above about 65 degrees should be okay. But once you go below that, obviously, as I alluded to earlier, you could have the risk of some of that lime literally producing those little limestone balls at the bottom of the slaker. So we really have to have a look when we design a plant like that, the atmosphere or the ambient conditions around the whole plant. So one really needs to have a look at the bigger picture, look at the incoming water temperatures, the atmospheric sort of conditions around the lime plant. That all goes into the final design of that plant itself. So it's pretty important to have a look at all those factors when you actually design a plant like that. Thanks, Prince.